Greatness has to do with he or she who uses their success for something bigger than them. Mm-hmm. Service to others, service to the least of these.
Dr. Cornel West made a much needed appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and I have several clips here to break down for you. Now, before I get to them, I just want to say I think this is potentially a shift in Rogan's content and the guests that he has on in general, and I'm going to explain why. But first, let's get to this first clip here where Cornel West discusses, and actually Joe Rogan chimes in as well, on how the free market fails people.
This is one reason why I spend so much time with my dear brother Bernie Sanders, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a democratic project that simply says, how come poor children can't have access to some of the things that the children of the well-to-do have? They have the same value, and of course, as a Christian, for me, they have exactly the same value, right? So how will they get it? Well, here come socialist movements that say, first thing they want to do is, we're against child labor laws. That's the jungle. That's Upton Sinclair. He's a socialist. Tried to be governor of California, right? And what were they doing? What were these capitalists doing? They're hiding these kids at 6 years old, 7 years old. They were dying at 30. There were no laws against child labor. And working 7 days a week. So the labor movement brought us the weekend. And I'm not talking about the singer from Canada. God bless him. I'm talking about the 2 days we have off. Because if we didn't have that from the socialist movement and the labor movement, they'd have been working young kids 7 days. They did that year after year, decade after decade. That's greed.
Right.
That's greed. There's no accountability, you see.
That's where that whole idea of let the market decide falls apart.
Exactly.
Because the market just wants profit, right?
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean that markets cannot be used in democratic ways.
But they need to be ethical.
But they got to be ethical. You got to have some accountability and regulation.
All right. Now, before I go any farther, you have to watch the whole podcast. Do it after this video, but I'm telling you, this may have been my favorite. Like, I kind of have stopped watching Joe Rogan for the most part, but I'll come back and watch an episode if there's a good guest. This is the best, I think, probably the best episode of the show that I've ever seen. Cornel West is just, he's basically an intellectual for the people. This is somebody who is so well read. I mean, if you watch or listen to the podcast, the entire time he's pulling out references, he's naming names, he's bringing people, like the shit that he talks about. It's just like, sometimes you have to pause it and just like, and try and absorb everything that he just said, because he'll make references, bring in points, and he kind of brings it all together into this crescendo of knowledge that can be hard to take in all at once unless you really break it down and try and understand what exactly he is saying. Now, that said, the way his ability to communicate his points are just, I mean, nobody compares to Cornel West. But just in terms of the references that he brings up, not everyone's going to know all of the authors he mentions. Not everyone's going to know all of the entertainers he brings up or all of the activists he brings up. So it's sort of this like, it's almost like opening a textbook and you have somebody explaining to you what's in that textbook, but while at the same time doing it in an effective way that even if you don't know exactly everything that he is referencing, you still get the overall point and you are more knowledgeable for it. So look, I'm not going to rehash what he just said here, but it's clear socialist movements and labor movements have been so vital to society. So this is something that needs to be brought up when we are talking about democratic socialism or talking about Bernie Sanders and this political revolution. Is look at all the change that has occurred in society. It's been done because of these ground up movements. It's never top down. It's from the bottom up. And Cornel West has represented that beautifully in his point there. Now, I also find it kind of interesting that Joe Rogan, acknowledging that the free market has some problems, and it's all about profit, and it does need to be regulated. A lot of Rogan's guests in the past have been people that have been spreading, this conservative ideology that is so, It is so rooted in greed. And it's no surprise that the people he has on, like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, these people are propped up by billionaires, which is why they are spreading that message of greed, but masking it in the frame of individual. Oh, everyone should just be free to be themselves, be their own individual. You don't want the government in your lives. It appears here Rogan is beginning to catch on to that BS. Let's get to the next clip here where they talk about free rides.
There's a narrative that you get from poor people often, or people that are lower middle class, that are against the concept of socialism because they equate it with people that want a free ride.
That's right.
They equate it with people that don't want to work hard.
That's right.
And it's a strange narrative when you consider all the things that we talked about already, like what we need with the fire department and the police department and all the different ways that socialism does form utilities and all the different ways that socialism does form a part of our culture and our community. Why do you think that is this narrative, and how does that narrative get reshaped? Because that narrative of that the only reason why people want socialism is because they want a free ride.
Right. Oh, that's a wonderful question, brother. One is that we had to listen very closely to our right-wing brothers and sisters and conservatives and middlers, because oftentimes, they're human beings like anybody else, and they've had their own arguments. I don't think they have strong ones, but they have their own arguments. So the first thing you'd say about that is, what makes you think that the well-to-do don't have free rides? What is inheriting wealth all about?
Well, inheriting wealth is free ride.
Absolutely.
That's all it is.
What is the connections of getting into the prep schools and the Ivy League schools and so forth? Even though they work, it's still a kind of free ride.
Yes.
So if they're preoccupied with this issue of being free ride, we tell them, let's make sure that people do work hard.
Yes.
And sacrifice, and therefore in some way deserve what they have. Now, if just based on that principle, the upper echelons of American society would be indicted.
Yes.
Deeply indicted. And it's not a matter of hating the rich, because I don't believe in hating anybody individually. I hate greed.
Yes.
I hate injustice. But the human beings where these ideologies filter through are still human beings.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So that's the beginning of it. Now, of course, part of the question here has to do with, they'll say, well, we wasted this money on the poor. You say, well, wait a minute. Donald Trump just passed a $750 billion military budget. Democrats voted for it, too. How much waste is in the military? Why is 60 cents of every $1 coming out of the federal budget tied to the military? Why is there no close oversight and accountability of it?
So, one of the best aspects, or one of the reasons why watching this podcast was so enjoyable for me, is because I know a lot of Rogan's audience is conservative. And they're watching this and maybe learning something. Understanding that, hey, actually, when you talk about free rides, no, the person that needs food stamps, needs help in the welfare state, no, they're not on free rides. The people that have the free rides are the people at the top that oftentimes are paying people like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin to distract you with cultural issues so that you won't focus on the actual problem, which is those people at the top. So you have a system designed around greed. When you have a political system that is so entrenched in money, in profits, what you have are these, whether it's massive companies, whether it's wealthy people, essentially buying elections, slowly moving in their views on deregulation into government, deregulating aspects of different industries that end up benefiting them, end up helping their profits, their wealth, and then hurting everybody else. But a lot of these conservative voters, they don't see that because they are distracted by the cultural issues. They are told to be fearful of the others, people that don't look like them. They're distracted by crap like that, while they're being same people are being robbed blind by the wealthy. And I think part of what Cornel West is able to do here is that he humanizes conservative voters, and that isn't really a bad thing, because it's not the person that's the problem. It's the ideology. It's the fact that these people have been brainwashed. If we can understand these are human beings, then we can understand that there is a way to get them out of the thinking that they are in. But a lot of times these people are born into conservative families. They're born into certain ways of thinking, and they have never been challenged on that thinking. So how are they going to learn if they haven't been challenged on it? They're going to still be stuck in this worldview, in this ideology, because that's all they've ever known. To me, it doesn't make sense to hate people who don't know any better. What actually makes sense to me is to try and educate those people, change their minds. Now, let me get to the last clip here, where this is maybe my favorite of all these clips. They talk about the American dream and the welfare state.
Part of the problem, the American dream, it doesn't go far enough. See, the American dream says, I'm going to work hard, sacrifice, and get mine and live large in some vanilla suburb, maybe with a trophy spouse, and feel good about myself. You say nothing wrong with wanting to gain access to resources, nothing wrong with working hard, nothing wrong with living where you want to live. But then the question becomes, now you're successful, but you're not great. Greatness has to do with he or she who uses their success for something bigger than them. Service to others, service to the least of these. So that the great ones, like the Richard Pryors, you see, not a matter of how much money he made, it's a matter of his soul in his comedy and the love that he left in his legacy. Martin Luther King Jr. died basically a broke man. Gave every penny that he won from the Nobel Prize to the movement. Malcolm X only had $150 in his pocket. Who cares about the richest black person in 1968 and 1965? That's ephemeral. We're talking about deep joy, deep love. We will remember those who raised their voices and said, in the name of something bigger than my ego and my narcissism and my hedonism, and we all have it. We all have it. So, we have to always be self-critical in that regard. We all fall short. The great Samuel Beckett, another great comic writer. Try again, fail better. That's the story of our lives.
Yeah.
Try again, fail better. But even in failing better, we can at least raise our voices and try to connect it to movements and organizations and structures. And thank God we still do have a significant number of decent people in the American empire. They just feel powerless.
Well, there's this conversation that's happening now, right? And there's a conversation that's based on the information of recognizing the fact that so many people have wasted deep aspects of their lives, long lives, pursuing meaningless things.
That was very true.
And recognizing that there is a lot of injustice in this world, and that people are afraid of admitting that injustice, because then they would somehow or another be complicit in the enactment of that injustice. I think it's one of the things that people are terrified of when you talk about doing something to reinvigorate poor and disenfranchised communities.
That's right.
They start talking about the welfare state, or this is not how things should be done, and people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, not recognizing that everybody isn't start at the same starting line.
Absolutely.
There's a concept that I've been talking about, that if you really cared about America, you would want less losers. Like, what was the best way?
That's a nice way of putting it.
What's the best way to love America? Well, would you want more winners? You'd want everybody to be a winner.
Absolutely.
Like, if we have these disenfranchised parts of this country that have been that way forever, when you address that, though, the people that don't suffer in those communities, that aren't a part of that community, there's a natural inclination to resist.
Oh, that's true.
And it's because they don't want to do anything. They don't want to think they're responsible. They don't want to think they're a part of it. They don't even want to discuss it. Even discussing it, you feel resistance.
This whole exchange was just perfect. Cornel West going into how the American dream doesn't go far enough because it doesn't address service to others. The American dream oftentimes is framed as you doing the best you can for yourself. You winning. What can I do to make money? What can I do to gain fame? what it should actually be about, what the American dream, what really, not even just the American dream, worldwide. As a Canadian, I look at this from not really an American perspective, but just as a person, as a human being, what we should be doing isn't chasing money. Even though that's what capitalism wants us to do, we're set up to try and do that. What we should be doing is trying to help others. Once we can, sustain ourselves, obviously, once you can make enough money to be able to live, what we should be respecting are the people that then use their time, use their effort, sometimes use their wealth to help other people. That is not respected enough in society. We look up to people, or at least, the way media frames things, the way pop culture frames things, we look up to people that have a lot of wealth, a lot of star power, a lot of girls, but that isn't what life is about. And I think we are beginning to see with movements like, whether it's the Bernie Sanders campaign, or just in general, these movements like the DSA that are really more rooted in helping other people, more rooted in creating a society where we can all benefit. I think we are on the precipice of a shift in society, of realizing this. I mean, you go on Twitter now, and I know Twitter isn't real life, but oftentimes it is real life because these are largely real people and they're sharing their experiences. And when you see, you go under any tweet from like a famous person where they're bragging about their new car or something, you're going to see people underneath criticizing capitalism. It happens everywhere. People are becoming more informed, becoming more aware that we have been stuck in this system of profit, of greed, of just looking out for yourself and not looking out for those around you. And Cornel West was just, I think, the perfect guest to really communicate all of this. And easily, now that I'm watching some of this back, easily my favorite podcast that Joe Rogan's put out. And as I said at the beginning, I do think Rogan is potentially seeing a shift himself in his political views. He tweeted out this after the podcast saying, "I had an amazing conversation with Cornel West today. Absolutely one of my favorite podcasts ever. The man is as kind and friendly as he is brilliant." There is a potential here that, like, the reason why it's important that Rogan changes his mind on these issues, or doesn't change his mind, but evolves on these issues, learns more, has someone like Cornel West on, is because Rogan has an incredible effect on society. Millions of people, millions upon millions, especially young men, watch his show, listen to his podcast, hear what he has to say, follow him on Twitter. Rogan is a force in society. And, for the past few years, I don't think it's been largely a positive force, because he has propped up people that are just dishonest, are grifters, are looking for a paycheck, are not living a life of service to others, but are living a life of greed. But if he begins to have on more people like Cornel West, it's going to be hard to compare to this podcast, but if he begins to have, more and more people like Cornel West on the show, these left-wing intellectual thinkers that can really break down the issues in society and what we need to do to overcome them, Rogan has the potential here to have an incredibly positive impact on society and especially on young men.